Hello, this is the CDH Dad and
the CDH Warrior.
And we welcome you back to Mondays on Mondays once again. And appropriately happy 4th of July since we're the day before the 4th. Just the normal disclaimer that we typically put in is that we're not medical professionals. It's not that we have a background in medical or psychology, sociology, any of those, but we're a family that's had two significant special needs events with our children, and what we're trying to do is just kind of provide a forum so that people can discuss and address and work through some of the awareness on some of the issues that arise from these things, how it deals with the family dynamic, and how we can help improve everyone's general lives. So thank you once again for joining us.
And with that, let's roll the title.
Hello once again, everyone, and welcome back. The topic we kind of wanted to go over today, and part of this comes from what we've seen in some of the social media discussions, is what is needed in terms of the therapy and support when you're bringing your child home, when you're going through a lot of these things with an infant.
Yeah.
And a couple of the things we wanted to bring out is that, some of the questions I've seen parents asking is, well, in our particular case, I've got a son who is CDH, and then, so that was a neonatal issue at birth, diagnosed. So we went through weeks in the hospital, in the NICU, and then out for a couple of weeks and then back in for surgery. So several months before we could get into a normal routine. And when we say normal routine, this is a child who we brought home and had to have oxygen, tube feeding, all of the bells and whistles and things that were necessary at that point in time.
Because if I understand correctly, I was on a kangaroo pump.
You were on a kangaroo pump for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Actually, when we first brought you home, you were on hyperalimentation, which meant feeding through a central line. So that's a very difficult type of situation when you're doing that with your home life. So that's an instance. Now, my daughter was an aplastic anemia diagnosed at about 1.5 years and ended up having to have a bone marrow stem cell transplant. So a lot of setbacks as she was just in that toddler stage.
Yeah.
So we can address kind of both of those, but part of what I wanted to bring about is the discussion that I've seen with a lot of parents of, oh, well, my 6-month-old is not at the same milestones of other 6-month-olds when I've got them home. And it's like,
they're not going to. I mean, let's start off with the obvious thing. They're not going to. You've been living in a hospital room. Let's say you've been living in a hospital room 3 months or 6 months. You're not going to meet the same milestones. So don't try to compare your kid to others.
right, it's a basic setback. And one of the examples I try and bring out and mention to people is, if you're an adult and you go in for a procedure, even if it's a 1 or a 2 day procedure, generally you're going to be several weeks in recovery. And in many cases, the doctor is going to recommend some type of physical therapy or occupational therapy to help you get back into a normal routine.
Yeah.
You've got to consider that for a child. This is when you've got a CDH or a birth issue, you've got a child that's been spending their time doing aquatic aerobics, living in the womb and being able to move around and kind of doing the basic things and just trying to get a beginning feel before the birth experience. And in many cases, particularly with the CDH, after birth, they're going to be sedated. They may be on ECMO. There will be surgeries involved. So the normal movements and items that they would go through on a 24-hour basis of just beginning the physical activities are suppressed for weeks or months. In most states, there are programs available, which is part of the childhood development, early intervention. There are different names in different states, but I know we've experienced them in 2 different states, in Florida and Georgia. But these are programs to help parents with children that have some deficits, help them get up to speed as quickly as possible. This is one that, it's generally available at little or no charge, and it is greatly helpful. In the case of my son, he was in Florida. We initially went through the program and found therapists that we worked with. And I'll be honest, the first set of therapists that we had were not the best in terms of that type of condition, because a CDH is a fairly unique health condition. It's
1 in 4,000.
1 in 4,000, and then there's
at the time
1 in 4,000 of occurrence, and then at that point in time there was only a 30 to 50% chance of survival. So 1 in 8 to 10,000 children. So it wasn't a typical type thing. So the therapists that we had were trying to fit their therapy programs that they used across the board to this one child, my son, and it didn't work. We were actually able to go with a different group, which was part of the United Cerebral Palsy group, and they had a staff which was a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, and a speech therapist. And we were able to get the treatment programs there, and each of those therapists were very good at tailor-fitting the skills and techniques that they had to help. Now, again, one of the examples we had talked about is that as a parent, you can look at your child and say, well, it looks like things are going well, but a lot of times a therapist can look at the child and see where the deficits are that you may not notice. The example I wanted to bring out is crossing the midline, which is a term that the therapist presented to us.
Midline is this. So
right, from right side to left side.
Take and roughly consider the tip of your nose as the midline.
And it's one we had not noticed, but we were able to see that my son was using both hands, both sides, right hand and left hand. What we were not able to detect, which the therapist was able to see, is when he was using his left side, he was actually using his right hand on the left side of his body to help support and move things.
Yeah.
So that, was something that they were able to detect and work on techniques that we could use at home to help get past that point in life. So there's a lot of those type things. We had a speech therapist that helped some on use of the mouth, those type things. We weren't able to get into to eat and swallow at that point. We were 2 years before he began to actually eat, and it just happened to happen that at that point we were out with family. My mother-in-law was eating chicken nuggets and fries. He decided he liked French fries, and he decided he liked chicken nuggets, and suddenly he was eating. So there are a lot of those things that will happen and progress at unexpected times as things go. They will happen. It's just you can't make those things happen. You've got to try and work through those things and let the child develop at their pace. One of the other things I was going to bring up is that you may start early therapies, but it's also one that you'll want to keep a watch over a period of time and see where things progress. As I said, we started out in Florida, and then we moved to Georgia, and you had therapy up until in your elementary school years. And we were fortunate that there was a therapist who happened to be in the neighborhood, and we had her as a therapist, and were able to utilize her skills. But a lot of times it was one of, I remember having a chalk block put up on the brick wall next to our garage door, and part of it was throwing the ball at the square, and throwing it right-handed and left-handed. One of the things we know that, you're right-handed now, but from what we saw in early situations with some of the things when you first started doing sidewalk chalk and things like that, you would tend to do things more left-handed. A lot of the things you still do tend to be more left-handed than right-handed. You were probably predisposed to be left-handed, but because of the surgery, because 2 thoracic surgeries on the left side impacted the ribs, it was going to impact the use of that left side. So he ended up becoming a right-handed person. So, those are the type things that you're going to want to keep a watch on over time. And as I said, development over the long haul years, and see, are there milestones, are there points? As your child grows, through their teen years, you may want every few years to talk with your doctor, go to a therapist, and just see, is there anything that comes into play that is an issue?
Yeah.
In the case of my daughter, who was aplastic anemia, you had a child who, was at 1.5, walking, doing a lot of the basic movements, everything was normal development, and then going through a treatment and bone marrow transplant is a very traumatic experience. To give you the timeline, she was diagnosed in February, had the transplant in May, and then it was not until July that we were released from the hospital. And even at that point, there was a lot of treatment that was going on at home.
Yeah.
So we had a major regression. She'd stopped walking, stopped doing a lot of even the talking, and some of those were delayed in that fact. So again, going back to a therapist and working with a therapy group on different things and trying to find activities and other items that would help in that recovery and development stage. Sometimes you'll try and find some outside activities, not necessarily as official therapy, but things that will help in those development standpoints. In my daughter's case, she got involved in dance at a very early age, because that would help with some of the development gaps that we had because of that time in the hospital and because of the treatment factors there. So some of those things you do. Some normal childhood activities. There's questions about what you can do, particularly with a CDH child.
Oh, yeah. I see these questions constantly. Well, are they going to be normal? It's like, pretty much you're only limited by your own abilities.
It is, and typically with the CDH, there will be some doctors that will recommend avoiding some contact sports and things like that, because you've got diminished lung function. You've had surgeries and sometimes issues like that and concerns. Yeah. If you've had a patch of the diaphragm, there's concerns about can contact interfere with that.
Yeah.
So, there are going to be some things that you'll be working with your doctor and your medical team about, what you can and can't do. But there are a lot of general activities out there. Now that, at your age, it was early years, it was not so prevalent, but now soccer is a regular activity.
Yeah.
And soccer is not a heavily contact sport, so it's possible. A lot of just general neighborhood getting together and playing frisbee football or playing baseball or something like that are things that will help in the development process and help from that standpoint. So these are the things that we wanted to bring out, is that you've got to look at the long-term items. Yes, your child may not hit a 6-month or 8-month milestone in terms of what is expected. But you've also got to consider that your child has had a lot of experiences beyond what normal children have gone through.
Yeah.
I'm going to use an example from a friend of ours who had a child, and I don't remember the full impact of his defects, but it was hearing, speech, heart issues, a number of physical issues that impacted him. And what we found from watching him, because he's about 10 years older than our son, is that there was no fear. He had gone through so much in a hospital setting and through a lot of the treatments and things like that, he would do things a little more daredevil than other kids his age. I still remember him trying to dive off of a picnic table. This was in the yard, and he hit the ground. But, you know,
That sounds like Mark.
Yeah, he just didn't have that fear factor.
Yeah.
So those are the type things that you'll be watching as your child grows and develops and says, okay, well, they may not hit normal milestones, but there may be some abnormal things that you kind of look at and try and say, okay, how can we address and deal with those? So this is where I just wanted to bring this up.
We talked about the no fear thing. Consider the fact that I enjoyed rock climbing. I can't do it anymore, but I enjoyed rock climbing.
Yeah, and you were really good at rock climbing.
Yeah.
And that was actually a pretty good therapy item.
Yeah.
Because of the arms and the legs and the movements and things like that. So a part of what you're going to want to do is find what resources are available. Do it very quickly, because the sooner you can get these, the sooner you can address any deficits and problems that your child may have and help them quickly get up to speed on other items.
And with regards to CDH, the rock climbing is really good because it's pretty much all upper body.
Right.
Which is where your deficit really is.
Right. So, you know, you may not be able to hit some normal activities, but you find some other sideline activities that can help your child in their development process. Other type activities, I mean, dance, gymnastics, other type things that are full body type activities that help. Yeah. And I know in your case, very early involved in scouts and scout activities. So it's a lot of physical and mental activities that tax your child and help them to step towards new goals and development. Yeah. So once again, like I said, we are not medical professionals. We are not professionals in any aspect from that realm. But what we want to do is, within this forum, have a place where we can discuss and address items that you might have. A lot are with younger children and parents. But it's also one, particularly in the CDH world that we're dealing with, you know, you happen to be one of the older survivors that's within the groups that we deal with, because up until you were born, and you were born in a hospital that was just developing the new protocols for this, and you were in the first couple of dozen within that study.
I know a few that are older than me. I know one in their 30s, two that are in their 30s. One that is in her 50s or 60s. And one that's, Mary's in her 70s?
Late 60s. Yeah. And it was a later detection of that. But these are the type of things that the CDH group and the awareness group is just trying to get to a point where it's more known,
Yeah.
because CDH is 1 in 3,000 roughly. It's along the lines with some other known
I
birth
want you
defects,
to get rid of the spider.
but it's not necessarily as known as a lot of those items. But it is in the top 10 in terms of typical birth defects that families have to deal with. And one of the things we've discussed, and we'll probably bring up at another point, is there are limited facilities that have recognized protocols to help with this. So, the more that we can use social media now,
Yeah.
hopefully it helps other families and all of us get a better understanding and development of what can be done and what advancements are being made, and making sure that that's available readily for the parents that are involved in this and for the children as they're growing up and developing. So
I want to put two things at the end just so these two numbers stick with you. The first is 1 in 2,500, which is the incidence overall globally of CDH. 1 in 2,500. The other number that I want to stick in your head is 50%. That's the survival rate globally.
and that's the global rate.
That's the global rate.
But at facilities that have a recognized
It's
protocol is
90%.
about 90%. So the chance of survival is there, but part of this is the recognition of that. And it's one that a lot of doctors, OBGYNs, pediatricians are not familiar with. So it takes all of us to be involved in that. And it's very important for the parents to become very knowledgeable on the medical aspects of what is available, and be willing to ask the questions. I have great respect for doctors, but it's also one that we've got to do this as a team.
Yeah.
And you have to be the leader of that team because it is your child that is involved. So, any other input? If not, then once again, thank you for joining us for Mondays on Mondays, and have a very happy and safe 4th of July.
Have a great day.